Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live session today. Today is a special one. We've got actually two presenters with us today, Peter Aboud and Stephen Tangler from Enforso. And today's topic is Agile and Spice, how these two can be best friends. Can you see my slide moving to the next one?
Not yet.
Okay. Sorry, folks. We are doing a lot of making sure everything is good and ready to go here. I didn't have quite as much time to test my screen, so let me make sure I'm sharing the correct one.
Now we see slide 2, but we see the whole list, the whole.
Yes, okay. You know, I think I'm gonna go and roll with that just so we don't hold everything up here. So I hope you can see this well enough. I just wanted to show a few quick controls here for GoToWebinar. Yeah, y'all are in the back end of my PowerPoint today, but that's okay. So if anyone is brand new to this updated GoToWebinar platform, it might look a little bit different for you. So I wanted to point out a few features. You should see me screen sharing in the center of your dashboard here. If you move your mouse to the right, you'll reveal these screen controls. You can take a screenshot on the top. You can plus and minus, zoom in and out, or use the full screen expand. And then we also have the questions panel running. So look for the little question symbol. That's how you can ask questions to the organizers. We will be managing questions and monitoring for those. And throughout the presentation, when the time is right, we will make sure we get questions answered for you. So feel free to use that panel and interact with us there. And I've been mentioning the new discussion forum every week. So if you haven't seen or heard about that yet, as MPUG members, you have free access to this awesome new discussion forum. We are working on getting as many people in there as possible to make it really great. So stick around for the end of the presentation. And if you have a few extra minutes, I'm going to show behind the scenes on that and how to access it. I do want to mention that today's session is going to be a little bit longer than normal, which means that you get to earn more PDUs than normal. So that's awesome. And we have a lot of great content to get through today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let Steve and Peter take it away. Give me one moment here and we'll get you going.
Okay, I think you'll.
All right, and then let me just make you the presenter again. You should be ready.
All right. Okay. Hello, folks. My name is Peter Aboud, and with me is Steve Tangler. And I'm going to be driving most of the presentation here with Steve adding some good sports color commentary as needed, as well as some, he'll be feeding the questions to me, lobbing them in good softball fashion, hopefully. So, we're going to talk about Agile, which, is a really big word still, unfortunately. It covers a lot of space and assumptions. And Spice, which probably isn't one that you might be as familiar with, though it predates Agile, probably about 10, 15 years. And how these two can be, in some sense, best friends, or at least very good colleagues. That would be probably good enough. All right. So, start off with thank you. We appreciate this opportunity. Steve and I are both part of Enforso. And Enforso appreciates the opportunity to talk to you guys. Enforso on a page here, founded in 2016, and marries time-honored automotive wisdom with the innovative spirit of West Coast technology and digital mastery. What does that mean? It means an industry like the automotive, which isn't necessarily well known for its electronics and digitization and software, though there has been a ton of software in cars for decades, gets the boost from the West Coast, which has a lot of software and really large scale off vehicle software is what we'd be talking about. Big expertise there, married with the expertise in the automotive industry of the in vehicle software. So Inverso has both sides of this equation to try to help companies in the automotive space or other companies that are transforming in the digital age and having to have more of a soft sense of their products and business as much as a hard sense. Help them transform into the digital age. So that's Inverso. We're dedicated to forging a sustainable mobility future, uniting auto tech with innovative solutions for our clients. Yes, you can see our locations there. So that's the extent of the commercial. Thank you for your patience there. My background. So I have an extensive automotive background dating from the late 80s through to present day, in which I was part of OEMs, part of tier one suppliers, if you're not familiar with that term. A lot of the software and electronics for the last 20 some years has been developed by the tier ones and then integrated by the automotive makers. And what we're going to be talking about with Spice, or if you're more familiar with the predecessor or peer, really the capability maturity model, those are the kinds of tools that were put in place when a company like an automotive OEM started to source things from outside their own business and try to determine if those businesses are in fact capable of doing a good job of those products and what would be the things to measure them. And I spent a lot of time at the Software Engineering Institute in Pittsburgh, and then a lot of time transforming large large automotive organizations into software organizations and electronics organizations. I spent the last 10 years as CEO of a consulting firm in North America that did that and was sold. And then we kind of restarting another variant of similar types of consulting here now with the West Coast and automotive married together with Inverso. So that's me. I did a lot of time architecting small and large scale automotive software solutions and then building organizations and consulting businesses. Colleague Steve has a similar background in automotive. We've actually been working together on and off for 20 plus years. You can see his background there. He is a well-established author. You'll find his writings all over LinkedIn and Forbes.com. And prior to that, some great stuff on UI. That's really his root background of engineering, user experience, and human factors. But that turned into a great career in electronics and software and coaching organizations. Um, that's my colleague Steve. Anything you want
Excellent
to add to that?
summary. I love it.
Okay.
I'm slightly younger than Peter, but you would never know it from his flowing locks and such, right? That
Yes. Well, that's kids. That's the difference. All right. So we're going to talk about two things today: agile, and then this concept of spice. And so we're going to approach that and first making sure we're all on the same page about agile and its value. And then if you're not familiar with it, we'll try to introduce spice in a way that is quick and clear. And then we'll talk about how they work together and Q&A. Though I suppose if something pops up in your mind during this talk and you put the question in the Q&A, Steve will appropriately interrupt me to address it in a timely manner if it makes sense contextually. Okay, so don't be shy about that. All right, so what is agile? Okay, so there's a lot of confusion, and in fact, there's a famous paper from 1970 by a doctor. His name is Dr. Winston Royce, who basically wrote the original waterfall paper, which, there's these cultural or religious debates about agile versus waterfall. We specifically here have two images. On the left is the agile iterative icon of cycling repeatedly through activities. And on the right, we have this system V approach, which some might equate with a waterfall type approach where we do one, then the next, and the next in increasing detail, and then integrate them up the right side and increasing content until we qualify. And are these really compatible or incompatible? And the reality is that besides all the marketing blitz, which has occurred on many fronts, a person or a project can iterate through many runs of the waterfall V on the right-hand side, meaning I can go do a little bit of requirements, architecture and implementation and integration and test, and then do a little more architecture, requirements, architect. And the reality is that lots of projects, long before the waterfall was defined or even Agile came, lots of projects worked this way because, well, we make our best guess at what we think we want the product to do or be, and we go ahead and build it. And then once we built it, we find, hey, why don't we add this and we can add that, and then we can, and lots of times that can distort and disturb what was originally built in ways that are productive or counterproductive. And that's often the criticism of the waterfall, is that we try to figure it out all up front, but then as we get into it, it gets corrupted and broken. And then the criticism of Agile as well, we're not really sure where we're going. It's just better that we just keep moving, and then we'll just keep pumping out something, and eventually we'll get it to work. They both have criticisms and compliments in the world of communication, of marketing space. The reality is neither of them are perfect. Neither of them are broken. Both of them have a place, and you can certainly iterate through the waterfall over and over again. In that paper by Dr. Royce, actually from 1970, cites this example of iterating through the waterfall. So let's put the labels aside and the overzealous criticisms aside, and let's look at these things practically. All right. So Agile has a few key principles. All right. And I would say what I'm going to identify as the key principles in this discussion, or what Steve has also placed in here, it's more practical than what you might be familiar with if you've read the Agile Manifesto. These principles we're going to allude to here have to do with a concept of time-boxed planning, and that time-boxed planning has a focus of completing a functioning increment within the time box. So you might have heard of Agile with these 2-week sprints, these 2-week sprints. So what does that mean? Well, it means we can only plan 2 weeks at a time, so that's all we plan. That's not really what it's supposed to mean, but you see in bad practice that happening a lot. But really what it means is that instead of determining how much some piece of work might take, we break that piece of work down arbitrarily to something we think we can complete in 2 weeks. And then we put a bunch of things in that bucket and say, these are the things that this team can get done in 2 weeks. And then they go and try to do those things. And they either get them done or they don't get them done. It's binary. But they have to do it in the 2-week box. And then they keep track of what they achieved in that 2 weeks so that they can keep decomposing the work to the similar scale of what could get done in 2 weeks. And then they keep breaking everything up into those gross sizes of things that can be done in 2 weeks, so that then they can just keep putting stuff into the 2-week buckets and go attack the 2 weeks at a time. And that's the principle, this time-boxed planning. It's kind of a fundamental project management principle of Agile. All right. And what's important then to take away from that is that Agile really isn't a software method. It's not a software engineering method. It's not really a software development method. It is a project management approach that has its roots in a software development application. But, it's not solely applicable to software type of work. It could be any type of work. Could be project planned and tracked with an agile approach, with this time boxed approach. All right. And the goal then is not only is it time boxed, but in that time box, we're not just partially creating something. From a software perspective, it is that we create a functioning piece of software incrementally, and we keep adding to it in each of these time boxes. And that seems like, well, how do we get a reasonable amount of software done in 2 weeks? And well, yeah, okay, there lies the challenge. How do we decompose the work? How do we set up the work so that we can get stuff done in these 2-week chunks? Yeah, the devil's in the detail there. People talk about, oh, let's do 2-week sprints and blah, blah, blah. But you got to prepare yourself for the sprint so that you can come out of it with a functioning product. But there's another key principle. First, the time box. Second, that at the end of the time box, we have a functioning, incrementally increased functioning thing. In the context of software, a software program. But in the context of embedded environments, it would be, the software for some embedded thing. Now that gets more complicated, but let's just focus on the software piece for now. So a functioning incremental software package in 2 weeks. All right.
Just two clarifications if I can, Peter. Peter's using the 2 weeks as an example,
Yep.
but that time box could be 1 week, it could be 4 weeks. The most common is 2 weeks, but the principle of what he's talking about is exactly right. It's a time box that you establish, right?
Yeah.
And then the second just clarification, or at least add on, is that as he's alluding, it is a process in and of itself. Sometimes folks think of maybe one of the greatest confusions of Agile is that it is the absence of a process, and that's not the case. It's a way of working. It's a way of time boxing and being able to project manage your project. Go ahead. Sorry, Peter.
No worries. Okay, so the approach uses a few ceremonies, they call it. Actually, ceremonies is a word that's specific to one Agile method called Scrum. And there are many Agile methods, but the most common language that you hear is typically rooted from a method known as Scrum. And they refer to ceremonies that we'll talk about that are part of making this time-boxed project planning approach work. And just when you hear ceremonies, just think of meetings, okay? And these happen, and they are what both enable and monitor and track the execution of work in the time boxes. And in that same method, Scrum, our approach, there's something called a product owner, and it is the product owner who represents the consumers or the users of that product that you're trying to build with this Agile method. They're the ones that help determine in the sprint, did you make a successful increment of functionality? All right, so just to summarize on the key principles, we got a time-boxed approach in which we try to complete an incremental functionality that pleases the product owner who's representing the users, all right? And that they confirm that we've added value to that work. And we'll have a few references for those of you who are familiar with earned value, because a lot of what's in Agile gets its sources from traditional and historic project management principles. So the idea of earned value is we only earn what we planned. Well, in the case of the product owner in the product increment of a time-boxed segment, you only get credit for what they determined completed according to their definition of done that the product owner established with you. We'll come back to those concepts, but that's laying out the principles of Agile. So, how do we prepare for a successful product increment in a sprint? Well, we need to take our work and break it down into smaller and smaller pieces until we have pieces small enough that can be accomplished in a single time box. All right, so this picture takes a little bit of explaining. Today for example, let's just say today we're in a sprint, and the content, or what we'll refer to as the backlog, or you might also be more comfortable with the work breakdown structure of tasks, okay, that are in that time boxed sprint, are decomposed to a certain granular level. And there's no absolute for that. In fact, the team has to evolve to figure out over time what is that appropriate size. But it means that all the work that might be in the rest of the backlog, or the total work breakdown structure for what we have to accomplish, ultimately, before it can get put into a sprint that we're doing today, it has to be refined and decomposed into things that are small enough to fit into a sprint. And so if we look at the backlog at any point in time, this is, this release 1 is made up of this sprint we're currently in. The next sprint and the sprint after that are to the left here. I don't know if my mouse is showing up or not. There, you see. And so, and before these sprints take place, everything has to be decomposed into reasonable sizes. And of course, they won't always get that right. It's not going to be perfect. And things won't get finished because they ended up getting put into a sprint and they're too big. All right. But that's the goal. And so there's a ceremony or an activity that is constantly looking at the work breakdown structure, or the backlog, and decomposing it into things the team can consume in 2 weeks, or whatever their sprint size is. Should never be more than 4 weeks. But all right, so that's what we're doing when we're looking at an agile project. There should be an obvious concept of a backlog, because it's going to feed the time boxed plan increment with things that are decomposed enough to be done in that 2 weeks. So some people look at this and say, well, that's already way more planning than my project usually does, or these engineers can do this, so this is never going to work. And then you just have to keep reminding yourself, okay, that the Agile Manifesto and Agile was started by developers in backlash, or in spite of, business leaders. Okay, in spite of it, because they were rejecting unrealistic planning and overly a burdensome, quote, documentation. All right, so the approach was created by developers. It was not created by business process folks who then want to impose it on people. So it had its roots as grassroots in development. All right, so why did they do that? Because they wanted to take control of what can we get done so that we can build a realistic plan. And we'll come back to that point. But so we have the concept of time box, the concept of the product increment. In order to get the product increment to work, we've got to have tasks that can fit into the time box. And when they're completed as a group, give me value to the product owner or the user. And that the user approves, or the product owner approves, that you achieved the increment successfully or not. And we don't get credit if we don't complete it by their standard. All right, so requirements have to be discovered, described, estimated. That's what these numbered boxes are. Those are sizes, and those sizes keep getting broken down into smaller amounts. All right, so that we can have this backlog that gets prioritized, and it's prioritized by, well, which sprint will it go into? Then it will be done first. So by putting things into sprints, that is prioritizing them. And then how much can we get done? Well, that's what we refer to as a team's velocity. How much can they get done in a time box sprint? Because that ends up being their amount, their pace that they could finish the rest of the work in. So at any given moment in time, a team that's effectively doing Agile can tell you what their velocity is and how much remains in their backlog in terms of volume of work. And if they can divide that volume of work by their velocity and tell you how many more sprints it'll take to complete the work. They can do that on any given day. They don't need any time. You could walk up to them and ask, hey, how long till you're done with what's in the backlog? And they'll tell you, well, only 50% of our backlog is size, but of that 50%, there's 300 story points remaining of work in that 50% of the backlog that's left. And we're consuming 20 story points a sprint. So 300 divided by 20 is 5, 10, 15. 15 more sprints will be done. 15 2-week sprints is how many years? Somebody can do the math on that, but so it's probably not quite a year and a half or something like that. Anyways, I'm not going to test myself mathematically in front of you. I'll fail. But you get the idea.
It's 60% of a year, Peter.
That's right. All right. So, but they should be able to tell you, and a well-functioning Agile team they won't pride themselves on being able to tell you that. It's just kind of matter of fact. It's like, yeah, we couldn't function unless we knew this, because we need to know when we can make a commitment to deliver certain functionality. So our velocity and our measured backlog are two pieces of critical information to us. All right. So then let's get into this concept of how does the Scrum work? It's the most popular or most common Agile method. And it has these ceremonies that it refers to. A sprint planning, which involves going to the product backlog and selecting the content that can be done in that sprint based on the velocity, average velocity the team is performing at. They grab work that makes sense. There's a theme to the sprint, goals to the sprint, that these items, when achieved, will hit that goal and add the increment. We execute the sprint, and that's doing these daily stand-ups. And this is a very popular Scrum picture that always seems confusing to me, forwards and backwards. But we keep iterating through sprints and on a daily basis reviewing our work. So daily stand-up is a chance for the team to check if they're making the necessary progress on completing the work for that sprint. And if they're not, what are the impediments that get in their way, and how can those impediments be removed? Then at the end of the sprint, there is the sprint review, so inspection. This is where the product owner makes a determination as to whether each of these items that were in the backlog were achieved or not. It's binary. If this item was worth 5 points, if it didn't get done, we get 0 points. If this item was worth 10 points and it got done, we get 10 points. If this item is halfway done and it's 5 points, but it's not all the way done, we get 0 points. All right, so the velocity is measured just like earned value. You either achieve it or you don't. And these items in the sprint have different sizes or different amounts of work, and they'll earn differently. And so that velocity is the amalgamation and the average of a lot of different sized pieces of work getting done in the sprint period. All right, and so the sprint reviews where the product owner says what you got done or you didn't get done. And the retrospective is when the team looks at how they worked and what went wrong and what went well, and what do we make sure we keep doing because it works for us, and what do we stop doing or change because we got to make a correction because 50% of our sprint content was not done according to the product owner. So we failed in more than we'd like to. So those are the key ceremonies of Scrum, which is the most popular Agile approach. All right. All right, so then there's this idea of iterative development, incremental development, and some things that can go awry if you're not careful. Like in this case, you could do a type of incremental development where you don't really have the whole picture in mind. And so you're building a picture, and this is a picture of a picture. That's a mouthful. But you just draw a piece of the picture. And then the next piece of the picture, someone should hopefully be raising some yellow flags, but maybe red flags would be better. And then the rest of the picture is in place. And you can see this wasn't so great. That's a bad example of incremental iterative development. Whereas what's intended with agile approaches is at first we have a view of the whole thing, but it's very low res. And then we mock up in a little bit better resolution with some PVC and copper. And then we built our cast, and we can extrude some PVC directly into the form. All right, so here is the intended agile approach on the right-hand side, okay? So it's not like you can be agile by just start running in some direction, not knowing where you're going. It's very difficult to be successful in that approach, whether you call it agile or waterfall. But instead here, we have an idea of what we want in totality. We may not know exactly how we're going to get that radius on the handle on the left-hand side, okay? But we know we want a radius there. Right? And we want the spout coming off the bottom, all right? And we want it to be somewhat angly in its stylistic approach.
And that's the beginnings of requirements and design, right?
Yeah.
And those might change over time as you learn more, right? But those are
Yeah.
the very beginnings of requirements and design.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Okay. So this on the right is the appropriate concept of product increments, because at each step you have more or less the idea of a full picture, but it continues to improve and evolve. So the requirements get fleshed out better, and then the resulting design gets fleshed out in the implementation. All right, so what does agility offer? Well, there's aspects of transparency. And what do we mean by that? Well, the team knows what it can get done in a time-boxed window. And it knows that in order to be successful in that, it has to really, really decompose the backlog and challenge to understand the requirements, the input that it has to what it's got to create. And so you want the team to be transparent, both internally to itself and externally to the other teams it's working with. And give a view of, well, here's what we're capable of getting done. Here's what's in our backlog. Here's the size of things. Here's our rate of completion. This is our best probability of when we can get this work completed based on all this information that's all on the table. It's transparent. Adaption. Well, the whole point of the retrospective is that if something's not going well, we need to change it, because there's no better definition of insanity than continuing to work exactly the same way and expecting a different result. And that just summed up about 50% of my consulting career, working with companies that expect things to be different without actually changing what they're doing. Yeah, that is definitely insanity. There must be adaptation, and that's what the retrospective is. And there'll be a quote along that line from a very successful executive, and we'll talk about what that means. And then there is the idea of inspection. Of course, we shall look at the work we're doing. The product owner looks at, well, is it good enough for me? And the the team members, they do the same in the retrospective and in the review. Is it good enough? And if it's not good enough, how do we make it good enough? All right. So the idea there from Henry Ford, if everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. Well, that's the coordination. So I think probably many of you, if you're really into project management as a career, you understand that 9 out of 10 times, the challenge the project faces has nothing to do with the technical aspects of the project as much as it has to do with the human coordination. That sometimes that's the whole problem, the human coordination, because we've done these in the automotive. We've made these instrument clusters 100 times for 30 years, and now the issue is, well, we're making it for the 101st time, and we've got a whole new set of people, and they're in all sorts of new parts of the world, and they've never done it together. And yeah, okay, we might blame it on, well, we're using a new processor, and so that's difficult, or a new display technology, so that's difficult, but that's not really the bulk of the problem. The bulk of the problem is coordinating 200 people or 300 people or 10 people to get their work done at the same time so that they can actually integrate and coordinate the result of it together. That's the biggest challenge. So more pros of Agile. Some of these, there are references on the authors that have done the studies here. The one on the left saying, almost a 50% cost reduction over prior non-Agile projects with 65% better quality and 67% productivity enhancement, which would mean for the same cost, they got more product created, 67% more product or more features, more software into the release, which gave them a huge return on investment, which often means in the world of shrink wrap software, well, what used to be shrink wrap or just app that can, have in-app sales, the sooner you can get the feature to market, the sooner it can start generating revenue. So, if you comparatively say, well, the way we were doing it, we would get a feature out, it would take 12 weeks from start to get it out in the field where it could start generating revenue. But if we, did these Agile projects, we got it out there in 3 weeks. So that was another 8 weeks or so.
9 weeks.
Yeah, math in front of people has never been straight. I am not in Mensa. I'll be clear on that. So that's 9 weeks of revenue ahead of time. But I did run successful companies. I just don't have to do it in my under pressure. So, all right. So that's the left-hand study. The right-hand study, similar, only this was about the intangibles. What did they feel about achieving the things on the left? Well, they just felt like there were fewer risks because more transparent situations on what we could or couldn't do. It did get to market quicker. That's what returned the investment faster. And the project was more visible. That's transparency. So we had a better backlog plan. We had more clarity as to who was doing what in what time frame and when more work could be accomplished. We could project better. And that helped them to manage customer expectations better. Of course, right there, the product owner is actually representing the customer or is the customer. They're right there at the end of every sprint saying what's good or bad. You can't really get more transparent than that. And then they can tell you what they want you to fix or not fix, and you can adjust your sprint content accordingly. So lots of studies that espouse the greatness of Agile. I take them all with a grain of salt. These are pretty generic, positive remarks on Agile, and those studies are reasonably performed and credible. But there's a lot of crap out there, so you do have to be mindful of that. More stats. So this is a 2023 study, and it showed that 9% of Agile projects fail versus a 29% of waterfall. Now, I'm not the one that's going to argue Agile versus waterfall. This particular study had references in mind in comparison. And Why did Agile succeed higher than the waterfall? It's typically because of the short cycle and the quick iteration with feedback to adjust. Versus sometimes waterfall projects just end up going off on a bad tangent for too long before they correct. So the Agile projects are nearly 1.5 times more successful than waterfall projects. Yeah, and a lot of that, just to boil that down, why does that happen? Because if you're following those Scrum ceremonies appropriately, the team can't get too far off track, and they're less likely to make a commitment they can't meet. And those are key definitions of success. Making a commitment you can meet and not going off the rails. Why do waterfall projects seem to have a higher tendency of that? Well, they might get just stuck in too far of an open loop before they start to have a retrospective and look at what's going right or wrong. Okay, now some people might argue then, well, boy, if these guys are decomposing their work into stuff that can fit in 2-week sprints, and how are they going to make it? Then it may not be worth the effort. So the summary here is small projects and extremely small teams. They probably don't need, well, first off, small projects, small teams don't need as much project management support, period. It just is human nature. When they're smaller team, they're sequestered together, there's a lot more informal stuff that ties them together. And so there's a good chance that, Agile approach isn't going to help them because it might just add more context activities than they need to keep themselves aligned. Sometimes in the case of extreme research, in which little is known and much is to be discovered, there may also be challenges in applying the detailed planning approach. All right. Sometimes the real thing on the research project just comes back to the scale of the team. Large number of people need more project management than fewer number of people. Fewer number of people that have done the same thing over and over again already probably need less additional project management overhead than, whatever you want to call it, than a new team that's doing something new for the first time. So there's certain sweet spots in applying Agile methods. Why do they fail? Well, often what's happening nowadays, I think in the last, let's say 5 to 7 years, the biggest problem has been, it's been a top-down approach. Organizations have said, you shall be Agile people instead of the grassroots. And, just as a matter of principle, most software developers don't like to be told what to do. It kind of bugs their ego. So they just rebel because, they're being told to be Agile. And that it's horrible. I see that in a lot of corporate initiatives to be Agile. It just gets thwarted because it's getting pushed down and it's getting misapplied and misunderstood. But then, the second most significant reason for failure is that, okay, still, even if it's a bottom-up grassroots approach, still have to understand the method. And the time-boxed approach with something else that we won't get into too much detail is called unitless estimation, which are two key, another aspect of sprinting effectively. They're not obvious approaches, though they're all derived from well-understood project management principles and approaches. All right, so that kind of wraps up the Agile section. I think we're doing okay. No questions coming in yet on that. If you think of some, chime in. But I'm going to go and talk about SPICE now. Okay, so SPICE is an acronym, a weird kind of acronym: Software Process Improvement and Capability Determination. The history of SPICE, quickly. If those of you who knew about the capability and maturity model, that came out of the Software Engineering Institute in the late 80s, early 90s. I think the first one was actually officially published in 91. But it was defense priority, U.S. defense priority information. And so it was not exported to our NATO colleagues. So in Europe at the same time, early 90s, they created this SPICE. Both models, in a sense, were about determining the capabilities of an organization to develop software successfully, but then were both generalized. The CMM went to the CMMI, and SPICE became bigger than just SPICE S software, but S system. And they began to be just approaches for measuring product development teams when it could be multidisciplinary, electrical, mechanical, and software. But it's about a capability. It's looking at a project team and saying, are they working in a good way, a good enough way to ensure the probability is high that the thing they create will be successful? All right. So SPICE is a way to measure the capability of a team that's doing work together to create some common goal. And its measurements are some, 250 to 300 data points of, performance. So it's not an audit, it's a measurement across a whole number of characteristics. And it is used in many industries. Our experience, my particular experience with Steve and I's experience, is largely in automotive, but it came from outside of automotive and has also thrived largely in automotive. It enables this objective evaluation of what's called process areas, all right, on a single project. And it suggests improvements to take the project's current position and show where the lacking weaknesses are against a reference of what needs to be accomplished. There's a reference here at automotivespice.com, an example model, and there's lots of SPICE models, but one particular one is Automotive SPICE, and you can find it there at that link, automotivespice.com. But here's a picture of its set of what it refers to as processes, but we'll call this a model, this model of how to evaluate the capability of a project team. It gives, in quotes, kind of the requirements for each of these activities. So activity like system requirements analysis, system architectural design. It doesn't care how you perform the requirements analysis, but in fact, it gives you the outcomes that are expected if you do a good job of system requirements analysis or software requirements analysis. So, for example, let's just briefly talk about the software requirements analysis. The expected outcomes of that activities are that there are software requirements that are structured and prioritized. There are software requirements that are analyzed for correctness and technical feasibility. There's a relationship between the software requirements and the system architecture, and the software requirements are agreed upon and communicated to the affected parties. So you can just from those outcomes, you can tell it doesn't really tell you how to do anything, but it tells you what's expected. So an assessor can come to a project team and see if they're achieving with the way they're doing things those outcomes. And if they're not, they don't have a way of analyzing requirements or have any proof that the requirements they have were analyzed, then they've got a weakness and they need to improve their approach for analyzing requirements. So, multiply that times 300 some questions, and that's what a project team goes through to get analyzed against a SPICE model so that they can determine where their strengths or weaknesses are as a team and improve their capabilities so that they can better make the product they're trying to make. Oops.
I think it's worth noting in that bottom right of that corner, there is a project management. Man 3 project management is one of those 16 process areas. So again, just something to put a pin in and remember as we go through.
Yeah, and where does Agile really fit? As we kind of alluded to it, it's really a project management approach. So there is, a single dedicated process to project management in ASPICE, but it does go a bit beyond that, but that might be out of scope for our discussion today. So major reasons to measure. Okay, so this in a nutshell just says software has grown in automotive. And this just shows the growth since 2005. But you could draw this same relative curve from 1992 to 2005. It's just squished, but the relative growth just has been persistently increasing for decades. And it's complicated because it's creeping into more and more significant aspects of the vehicle. It's creeping from the vehicle back to the cloud. And this opens up all sorts of challenges and risks. So getting a team capable of developing the software effectively is critical. And it was critical. And this model helps measure and direct the team's improvement focus to where the capabilities are most problematic. So why do they use SPICE? They use it as it's Dr. Phil in a book for project teams. So where are problems and what should we do to fix them so that we get better and we make our project better? So it requires that the team wants to improve. That's the whole point. They've got to have a desire to improve. And why would they want to improve? Well, a business would want to improve so that they can manage their profitability better. Projects that run out of control, overspend, you lose money. You might still make money, but you're losing opportunity. You could have had a bigger margin. You could have done more projects than the ones that you did if you were more efficient and effective at doing those projects. So there's huge motivation for a business to always increase its team efficiency. And for the customer, okay, if I'm your customer and I'm getting something from you, well, I want to make sure that there's very low risk that you're going to give me crap. I want to know the team is capable of developing an effective software product or integrated embedded product to give me. So I want to measure that capability to find your weaknesses for you so that you can improve those to reduce the risk that what I get is problematic. And here's the challenge. This is a little plot of recalls over time, and the number of recalls that we could say are related to software is in the mix here, but just the general number of recalls has increased, and the general amount of software has increased dramatically in the last 10 years. And so the red and orange dots. Go ahead,
And by the
Steve.
way, NHTSA's slow on updating this chart. The heat map would be just red on in the last couple of years. There have been a lot of, especially software related recalls that have happened in the last couple of years.
Yeah. So better way of working equals profit, right? So this is what I was referring to. We need to lower the NRE is what it's often referred to, non-recurring engineering costs. It's the one-time cost of developing the thing that you only pay to create it and you don't have to pay to maintain it. That rises incredibly high with high cost of rework and sloppy work. So we want to avoid that rework, and we definitely want to avoid warranty, which is stuff that's the cost in the field, and either prevent the failure or remove them at the cheapest point. So reducing the development costs is going to help increase quality and reduce the risk. Okay. Efficiency, more predictable delivery timing, right? So if we, the number one disruption to delivery timing is often problems, bugs, unexpected. It's unplanned, it's unexpected. The amount of time it's going to take to get rid of it is a problem. So it chews up resources and it's a horrible waste of resources. So avoiding that is going to increase efficiency. So all these are not earth-shattering revelations by any stretch, but a model like ASPICE or SPICE is trying to help a project team improve these efficiencies. All right, and then of course, if we get done on time or even earlier, we can increase the revenue, and because we can get to market sooner. Maybe not so much with cars most of the time, we have a fixed production time frame, but just about any other software application could get to customer market sooner. All right. So we want to get profitable, and we either want to manage your profit or increase your profit. All right. And we do that in this sense with a lower cost of rework, or even avoid the rework completely. So, so this some work out of Carnegie Mellon. This is a quote from Watts Humphrey. And this data is from the personal software process and the team software process, which was an early Agile of the body that created the manifesto, ran annual conferences to approve methods in the early days of PSP and TSP were early Agile method. And it was a lot of discipline that involved focusing on the prevention of defects, the prevention. The early removal was an aspect of it, but the bigger aspect was to get the prevention of it. And preventing defects was a lot of rigor, more discipline involved, but the payoff was huge in terms of quality improvements. So a 78% productivity improvement because of improved quality. And his point here was, it's not that quality isn't free, but in this case, it could pay. And that point was, well, again, getting to market sooner, getting higher revenue started earlier, and you can actually generate revenue by having better quality. And this is dead on. Another study related, IBM and NIST, is really looking at here, and this is a very well studied problem, the cost of a field defect that has to be fixed. It's huge. It's usually exponentially higher than any other time of removing the defect. But again, this is all about finding and removing the defect as opposed to the previous slide, which is really a focus on the prevention of it. Both cases, you want to either prevent it, or in this case with IBM and this data, you want to remove it earlier in the process. You know, in the unit testing or this early software integration, you don't want to find it in qualification or validation testing at the end, or worse, in the customer's hands. It's just expensive. All right. Other studies here, Volkswagen space, BMW space, these guys both went after, how do we determine that ASPICE, automotive spice in this case, works for us? Well, these guys found those projects that had teams with higher capability had lower defect rates in the cars and fewer severe issues discovered during prototype development. Same with BMW. They found, well, hey, we have our own measure that says a project is good if we can, in retrospect, at the time of launch, look back and say, of all the defects found to date, were 80% of them or more found and fixed greater than 8 or 11 months ago, which meant what was today's product had very few defects in it because they were all found and fixed 11 months ago. And that was their success of the definition of a mature product. And then they related that or correlated that to the SPICE capability measure of the project team. And they found that, well, the higher the capability measure of the project team, the more probable their project was meeting the maturity standard of finding that 80% of the defects were found and fixed more than 11 months before production. These are just ways of them determining that, imposing a standard like ASPICE to measure the capability of the project team and then using that feedback to the project team to improve was worth it because there was payoff for them. All right. So how do these two bodies play together? ASPICE and Agile. Well, in Agile, there's this concept of good requirements. Agreeing to a plan requires that we know what the plan is trying to achieve, which is what are the requirements. That's the objective. That's the, quote, problem that has to be solved. All right. And then additionally, once we try to solve that problem, we have a design and we have tests to ensure we met the design and the design satisfies the requirements. And we can't skip the requirements or skip the design because it doesn't save time, because we're missing the opportunity to prevent failure. And we know that prevent failure is way more efficient at reducing cost of rework than finding defects and fixing them in any phase. So with Agile, this whole definition of ready, is about ensuring that the items that are in the backlog are fully defined. They're well defined to some consistent definition of what does it mean to have a requirement? What are the necessary aspects of it that need to be completed, identified, documented in the requirement so that we know it's ready to be worked on? Because if it's not ready, we shouldn't work on it because we're going to end up injecting problems and causing more rework. So we have to do this disciplined requirements work, which is part of what I identified for you in ASPICE that says software requirements have to be analyzed and evaluated and structured. All right, so those align together just fine. And then on the back end, the definition of done in the sprint is, well, we need to know everything that had to be done to achieve the needed increment or the work on that backlog item. Well, the things in ASPICE that say, well, we need to not only create the architecture, we need to create a detailed design specification so that we can then implement. And from the implementation, we need to have proper unit verification steps. And all these are definition of done for a activity that's planned in a sprint. And those align also with ASPICE. So, everything that's in the model for ASPICE that says what a project team needs to do can be implemented by an Agile team by having effective definitions of ready and definitions of done. If we go a little deeper, without really explaining a lot more about how Scrum handles requirements, they have this concept of a user story, which is a requirement template of a sense. It's a description of the functionality, what we want to be achieved, and it's written from the perspective of a stakeholder. And that stakeholder could be the end user or a customer of the system, all right? And that's the pieces that go in the backlog. And it works like a two-way promise between what the project team will do and what the product owner wants. And the two have to agree upon this. And then ultimately decompose it if it needs to be into smaller stories, and then put it into a planned time boxed sprint to get done. And then who judges it's done? Well, the product owner judges it based upon the two-way promise of what was in the user story that you said you'd accomplish. So these are all great aspects in ASPICE about, well, establishing an agreement on the requirement and a way to confirm the qualification of it in another process called qualification of the system or qualification of the software. So just looking at the left-hand side of the V here, we've got the requirements need to be analyzed and the architecture needs to be performed. And then from that system architecture, software requirements need to be derived. And all of these, this shift left, if you will, if you're familiar with the system V, all of this is about setting up for a good product increment. Defining the requirements, defining the greater part of the design so that we can establish small pieces of software that are going to fulfill the requirements and that part of the design, the architecture, and get them done in our time box sprint. So doing good planning from an Agile perspective is completely consistent with the needs of a model like SPICE, which is a quality management system that has more traditional, perhaps waterfall-y or V-cycle types of needs. And it adds as a gateway up front that says, well, we're going to set up the requirements and the architecture in such a way that we know what success means so that we can measure it appropriately when we think we've got it implemented.
Or in other words, we're not going to plan to build something unless we know the acceptance criteria, and there at the end can confirm that we met that acceptance criteria. And that gateway helps ASPICE, because ASPICE, when it's measuring, it's looking for, did you understand that stuff up front and did you confirm it at the end? Which is exactly what what Agile's looking to do as well.
Yeah. Okay, I was saying then we're on to realistic, right? So we talked about how an agile team that's using Scrum, for example, is trying to make commitments based on their velocity and their ability to decompose their backlog into consistently sized items that they can confidently put into their time box sprints.
Oops, it looks like we might have lost Peter. Um, the idea being that the sprint, right, is based upon your velocity, right? It's not based upon what does the customer want, what does management want. Again, back to what Peter was saying earlier. The business folks setting up unrealistic um, plans or goals for the developers, right? And that in and of itself is possibly part of the problem. Um, so
Okay, did I
there
go
we go.
offline momentarily?
Yep, you went offline, but you're back, and I covered.
Okay,
So you're good.
sorry. Yeah, I just everything shifted on me here, so I apologize for that. So did you get through this slide on the
I got
realistic
through this slide.
aspect?
Yeah, I think we got the idea. The
All right,
idea
great.
is that you're trying to make realistic commitments.
Yeah.
Your
Okay.
camera's off, by the way.
Oh boy, everything went south. Um, and that is not the right camera. There we go.
Here we go.
I'm back. Okay, sorry about that, folks. I think we can thank T-Mobile Internet for that one. Um, okay, so now we want to create estimates and plans that we got to fit things into the sprint. So there's a couple different ways to do that, but the approach that we've kind of informally talked about is decompose things into pieces that could fit into a sprint. And in this example, on the left-hand side, we have something called, unitless estimation, story points. And these guys finished 86 points, 97 points in these two sprints, a bunch of other sprints, but the average is 92 story points per sprint. The right-hand side is another approach, capacity-based, but the whole point is in either case, they have a known average velocity for what they can get work done in a given time box. So in a sprint, we can look and say, well, we put in another 91 story points into a sprint. Now, theoretically, in a 10-day sprint, we'd, in a direct line, plan to complete work consistently, which really isn't what happens, but that's the mathematical, just direct line. During the sprints, then, they need to look on a daily basis as what is their progress, their actual burn down. In this case, they're behind because, they're slightly ahead because they've got more value earned than they expected to have.
No, they're actually
And,
behind,
oh yeah.
right? They've only gotten
Oh yeah,
75%.
sorry. This is percentage on the left, not points. Sorry. So so they're behind and they haven't earned what they're supposed to earn. I see enough behind, I should recognize it. And so this one projects way out beyond. Um, so they're going to be late, and the point is, by looking at this on a daily basis, they should be making adjustments for it. If we take another one, okay, there's two goals here. We could be going well, we could be doing poorly. Either way, on a daily basis, the Agile team is looking at this burn down and saying, what do we need to adjust for? Okay, because even going ahead of schedule isn't necessarily good. That's missed opportunity. We could have put more in the plan. We could have gotten more done sooner. If we're consistently ahead of schedule, we're being too pessimistic and we're going to lose opportunity. If we're consistently behind schedule, well, that's also problematic. We're getting too optimistic on what we think we can get done, or we're not paying attention to all the impediments that we're running into, and we're getting delayed on flatlining progress because of things that we could have prevented. So there's adjustments that have to happen. And, you know, they almost all boil down to either somebody had to do more work than they expected, or somebody wasn't available to do the work. And everything translates into generally those two categories. But there's lots of variants of those categories. But they can't be ignored, and an agile team isn't going to. And this is great because in ASPICE, almost every aspect requires monitoring and adjusting. Monitoring our ability to get the designs done and adjusting if we can't get them done. Monitoring if we're able to analyze the requirements, adjusting if we're not getting them done. So, and it's built right into the whole agile approach. So how do we calculate the past velocity? And this is just to demonstrate that whatever isn't done, even if it's partially done, it doesn't count. We calculate the velocity based on what is completed. So we get credit for what we did and no credit for what we didn't complete. And this, if you're familiar with earned value planning and tracking, is just carrying that principle over in a slightly modified way, but same deal. We didn't get it done, it doesn't count. Now we got to look and understand why we didn't get that done so we can make an adjustment in the next round. All right. And so here it's what is the whole goal of the monitoring and adjusting? Because it's just like a battle plan. You go into a battle with a plan, but what happens is the battle. And that means the plan has to change. It doesn't mean don't plan. It means we need to make adjustments. There's new information, there's new discoveries, there's all sorts of things, information and circumstances that now must be accounted for while we're in the middle of the battle. So the idea that we can make a plan at the beginning of the project and then just stick with it till the end, that it just isn't reality. The plan adjusts because the circumstances adjust and because more information is known. And that can be good and it can be bad, but it needs to be adjusted. All right, everything's happening and everything needs to be accounted for. Everything's going crazy sometimes in the battle. All right, another way they play, it's the retrospective. And here's that quote from this brilliant automotive executive. How you do the work is as important as the work you do. This has been my mantra for over a decade, probably 20 years. It's not just getting it done. It's not the Nike principle. It has to do a lot more with how the team works, just as much as it is what the team has to accomplish. And the more people you have, the more critical it is that how you work is as important as the work you do, because coordinating 300 people can be just as problematic as 30 people and just as difficult as 3,000 people. But the problem isn't necessarily the technical challenge at hand for those 330 or 3,000 people. It's the coordination of the 3,300 or 30 people that's a problem. And that's the how you work aspect. And it just is not well respected that this is the challenge. How we work is as important as the work we do. And so in Agile, you have the concept, and particularly in Scrum, of a retrospective. And that's when, after the sprint review, in which the product owner said, this is what made it, this is what didn't make it, we talk about, well, why did we succeed and why did we fail? So what did we learn? What did we do well? Where are we still confused? What did we do poorly? And the team talks about how they worked to make adjustments in how they work so that they can improve their performance. And why do they want to improve their performance? Well, I tell developers and engineers, for your own selfish motivations, because if you guys do well in the project does well, the project's profitable, then the company stays in business, you keep your job. Better yet, even the company stays in business, you keep your job, you get a bonus, you get a raise, and you get to go home at 5 o'clock or, drop work at 5 o'clock and shift to your other home activities. That's
And you can
work
buy
like
that
that.
G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip for your kid. And
That's right. All right, and here's just another reference to it from Henry Ford. Henry Ford, who didn't invent the car, but defined how to make them in a higher volume and better quality fashion. So that's the pinnacle of how you work is as important as the work you do. What Henry Ford did to the automotive business with the assembly line. All right, almost on cue.
Fantastic.
14 minutes instead of 15 minutes of discussion. All right.
All right, so we have a couple questions. We certainly can entertain more. Because I've had a little bit longer to look at these questions, Peter, maybe I'll take a stab first, and
Go
then
for
you
it.
can you can
Yep.
build upon my answer. So
Yep.
one was what have you seen? I think it's emphasizing you because it's in capitals. What have you seen as the greatest reason for failure with Agile? Um, my answer would be almost a little bit of what Peter alluded to, that management seems to push it, and they push it in ignorance. And so, a lot of times, the aspects that we've talked about, or Peter especially talked about during this, that are aligned with automotive spice are completely lost, right? They push the word agile, they push the word sprint. They understand that it's 2 weeks, but they don't understand what is supposed to be 2 weeks. And in the midst of that ignorance and pushing, um, the whole value, the whole reason for doing agile gets lost. And so that one chart that showed the percent likelihood of problems, that fits with the lack of management support, that fits with the poor culture, and it fits with the lack of really getting the right information or the right education on how to launch it. So I would say, unfortunately, management has been the number one, the greatest reason for failure. What would you say, Peter?
Um, yeah, that's a big one. And right behind it is the continued lack of discipline of software developers and engineers. Because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can show them that if they work smarter, they'll have better results, and they'll still flip you the middle finger and say, yeah, I don't think so. And that's just human nature, and that is by far the number two failure: bad leadership, and then bad followers. And you can say, well, that those define the failures of just about anything. Yeah, and that definitely defines the failures of agile approaches, because you can look at these and say there's nothing new here, and stuff in the PMP book for a couple decades that is just embodied in a slightly different approach with agile, and yet it still fails.
I think maybe the thread between those. By the way, I love the chart that shows goes from simple to a little more complex, and then they wrote in the upper right corner anarchy. Um,
Yeah.
it's like it couldn't have been extremely complex, and we're still disciplined, but it's anarchy at that point, right? I think behind what we're both saying is the lack of missing the third aspect there, and maybe that brilliant automotive executive leader, and that is we're if you go in with the idea of we are going to constantly improve, then you should never be in anarchy, right? It should always get to the point where you're able to manage this well, and you're going to meet the requirements of spice or automotive spice or medical spice or whatever, right? You're going to be able to monitor and adjust. You're going to be able to hit those quality goals so that you're not risk to your customer or risk to your bottom line, right? And that lack of vision from the management that's pushing it, let alone the lack of desire to improve maybe by some of those bad apples, that's really what is creating the problem all along.
All
Okay,
right.
more questions we've got. Um,
One came in about the BMW study.
yeah,
You see that one?
yeah. So the question is, where the BMW projects, quote unquote, all software development projects, or a mix? Were they
They
system
were,
or go ahead?
yeah, they were what? So, oh, did everybody see the question? They don't all
No,
see
they
the
don't.
question.
They don't.
Okay, so or were they a mix? Were the stats based only on software development? No, they were not. They were what auto industry calls ECU, electronic control units, which is a custom mix of mechanical packaging, a custom electronics board, and custom software. It was all three. So the projects were for a supplier to deliver that custom ECU, in which case we have the system processes of Spice and the software processes of Spice in play. So
Yeah.
it's definitely more than software.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is, it says, hey, a lot of work seems to fall into the backlog. And as that happens, the timeline is pushed to the right, right? And that increases the cost and the stress of the timeline. And, the resources are, it says plowed into, and I guess maybe it's really forced or pressured into getting things back on track. Where does this leave cost and critical milestones? I would say, let's start off with, that's change management to some extent, right? And that's yet another spice or a spice process, is how do you manage that, right? The only way, first of all, to manage that is exactly what Peter was talking about with the monitor and adjust, right? You have to understand what is realistic. And then at the point where you understand what's realistic and what's in front of you, then you can stop and say, oh, hey, we're behind schedule, right? A big failing with a lot of projects that don't do that is they'll get down near the end and then they'll be like, oh my goodness, it's, turn on the red light, the alarms, we're way behind, we're never going to make it. And then that's usually when shortcuts happen and stuff goes out the door that wasn't tested or wasn't, um, you know, isn't complete according to what the customer needed. So where this happens or helps your cost and critical milestones, per the question, is the ability to say, okay, what is higher priority and what is lower priority, first of all, right, as far as the backlog goes. And then if we're able to project per that burn down chart, Peter, if you can go back to that projected burn down chart, right, where it showed that you're going to probably finish in 15 days instead of 10, right? At that point, you're able to pull one of three levers. It's either reduce scope, so that means take some of the stories out because we're not going to get them all done, right? The second one is extend the deadline. Maybe the business allows for that because some of this stuff is really, really critical, and that's where we're going to get our revenue. But we're going to have to extend the deadline. That's the second possible lever. And the third possible lever is we increase the velocity somehow. Like the natural reaction to that is we're going to add people, right? But adding people doesn't always increase the velocity, right? Sometimes you got a really green person you got to bring up to speed, or maybe the person's just not that productive, and so I caution you on that. But I also say there are ways to increase the velocity by taking impediments and roadblocks out of the way, or improving the tools or something like that. So those are your possibilities, but you can't pull any of those levers with respect to the milestones unless you understand how are we doing. Are we on track? Or are we not on track? Peter, anything you wanted to add?
No, it's good.
Okay.
I'm not completely sure what the question meant by things seem to fall into the backlog, but so I'm not, maybe
Well,
this is, I think you addressed it well with this is change management. Things keep getting added and that
yeah,
stresses the whole project.
we've seen
Yeah.
projects where things fall into the backlog, right? And it has everything to do with they're not managing it very well and just assume that anything the customer talks about gets added to, oh yeah, we're going to do that as well,
Okay. So the
right?
expression there is they're added without proper filter.
Maybe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, okay, seems like Kanban with WIP limits would be another approach to track and deliver this type of work. 100%. Kanban is within the umbrella of Agile. Um, Peter and I focused on Scrum just to give an example and stay with one example just because of the time. But absolutely, Kanban also allows you to measure the throughput of the team, and then at that point you can do the same extrapolation of, is our throughput going to get us there or not? Are we on
Yeah.
track? Okay. And I had another one that I thought was interesting. Is there anything in Agile that Spice or A Spice doesn't like? I would think maybe the only possibility is individual expertise within the team. It's a little harder to measure the velocity of the architect, let's say, if there are tasks that only the architect can do and they are one within 10 people on the team. That would be one aspect I could think of. Is there anything else you can think of that?
Yeah. The agile approach really likes to hide individual contribution within the agile team. And then sometimes with ASPICE, they want to know the resolution of activities down to individuals, but they're perceived sometimes as incompatible, but they're really not. If what's going into the sprint backlog is sized appropriately that those things can be pulled by a single Scrum team member to do the work, then that's fine. But some people get a little concerned that, well, but we didn't assign a task to a person. Well, no, ultimately the task got pulled by an individual and performed by that individual. So, one thing that you didn't really get into with ASPICE is that when you do an ASPICE evaluation, you're only looking historically backwards. You're not looking forwards in time. So at that point, after the fact, all tasks were assigned to whoever pulled the task in the sprint. But that's one area where I run into a lot of confusion with people thinking agile isn't fitting ASPICE in that context, but it really does. So,
Yeah. And again, Kanban maybe even more so makes it easy to be able to pull out what is the throughput of certain activities if they're tagged a certain way or things to that effect. Right.
yeah.
But I guess you could do that in Scrum as well. So I take that back. But maybe visually it's a little bit easier. It's hard to say.
Well, you can always
Okay. Well, I
chart
think
to.
that's all the questions we got asked, and we are just about 2.5 minutes until the end. Um, at the very least, I think we want to thank you all
Mhm.
for attending and asking good questions and paying attention, obviously. And hopefully you found this useful. And please feel free to connect with either Peter or I if you're not already connected with us on LinkedIn. And Morgan, thank you for having us. Um,
Yes, thank you both so much. This was a really great session, lots of good information. And we certainly look forward to having you both back so we can plan a future session.
that sounds great. That sounds great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so LinkedIn is a good place to connect with Steve and Peter so everyone can follow up there. This replay will be available within the next 24 hours on the MPUG website under lessons. So if you missed anything, if you want to just revisit, it'll always be there for you as MPUG members. Any closing thoughts before I take over screen share again? Just want to make sure I didn't cut you off.
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and share the PDU code for today. And as a reminder, it is 1.5 PDUs since we've been together for 90 minutes. Coming at you right now. One moment. And I think I got my full screen worked out. We'll see.
All right, there we go.
Okay, great. So the code today is MPUG 071724. Leave that there for a moment so everyone can grab that code. And as promised, if you would like to spend just a couple more minutes with me, I will show you around the new community forum. Stephen, Peter, if you need to jump off and get on with the rest of your day, you're welcome to do that. Or if you want to see the discussion forum, you can stick around as well as presenters. And you have MPUG author profiles. Peter, I might have to double check for you and make sure that you're in our system so you can access the discussion forum too. We have quite a few of our other instructors in there, which is just really great for members. You can go in there and ask questions about all kinds of things. talk with fellow members and then also some of our MPUG MVPs, as we like to call them. So that code one more time is MPUG 071724. And I'm going to switch my screen one more time. Thanks again for everyone attending. If anyone needs to go, we will see you next time. And for everyone staying, I am going to share the discussion forum. We're really excited about this. It is a big improvement over historically what we've had available. So the way you get here, you can type community.mpug.com into your browser and it'll take you to the discussion forum, or you can go to mpug and come over here. Make sure you're logged in first, which I am. Resources, discussion forum. You can click that and it'll take you to the same place. The very first time you log in, your MPUG credentials are going to get you into the forum. So it's really nice and easy. It'll maybe take you 5 minutes or less to set up your profile the first time you come in, and you can go to the little Start Here tab to get yourself acquainted, and then you are off and running. It's very easy. So we've got these 3 discussion groups going right now. There's also a growing resource sharing section. We have some how-to articles. Eric Van Herk, one of our regular contributors, posted some resources that he has available, templates and things like that. And anyone's welcome to share resources here. It's really cool. And then this is also a work in progress, but we are developing a job board. So members of MPUG will be able to see job opportunities and get connected to people that way as well. And it works kind of like a social media platform. So it's easy to post. You can share links. You can write a post, share photos, screenshots if you're having like a technical problem that you need help with, something like that. And you can also see who else is in the forum. I'll show you my profile. It's up to you how much you want to share in your profile, of course. But here's my bio, some links, posts I've made, comments, and spaces that I'm available in. Oops, going a little fast there. Yeah, so you can also direct message people if they have that feature turned on. You can write a message to other members. Oops, that was my edit button. Probably I can't message myself. That's probably why it's not working. But yeah, it's a great way to connect with other MPUG members. So we're excited to invite everyone in there. And that's it for today. Let me stop screen sharing. Let us know if you have any questions. You can always email editor@mpug.com if you need help. All right, so that brings us to the end. Thanks for sticking around for a couple extra minutes there. And we will see you all next time. Steve and Peter, we appreciate your time. We'll see you back again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.